All right, continuation of conflicts of interest with Biden regime. Okay, you ready? Just make sure I've got this on here. Should be able to scroll. Okay. Conflicts of interest. Federal regulation prohibits federal government employees from using public office for private gain or for the private gain of relatives. This regulation also seeks to ensure that the performance of official duties does not give rise to an appearance of the use of public office for private gain or of giving preferential treatment. This regulation, however, does not apply to the president or vice president. Other federal regulations require only the consideration of an appearance of a conflict of interest, where an employee knows that a person with whom he has covered relationship is or represents a party to a particular matter involving specific parties, and where the employee determines that the circumstances would cause a reasonable person with knowledge of the relevant facts to question his impartiality on the matter. The employee should not participate in the matter unless he has informed a designated superior and received authorization. According to the Office of Government Ethics, OGE, these rules and regulations help to ensure that federal employees fulfill their responsibility to endeavor to act at all times in the public's interest and avoid losing impartiality or appearing to lose impartiality in carrying out their official duties. In the context of U.S. foreign policy, the Foreign Affairs Manual, FAM, sets forth the policies and procedures for State Department employees working abroad. The FAM includes ethical regulations that take into account foreign policy considerations and treaty and statutory obligations. Specifically, when a U.S. citizen employee of the State Department is serving abroad and subject to the authority of that country's chief of mission, that employee's family members can be prohibited from employment or other outside activity in any foreign country if the chief of a mission is in that country determines it could damage the interest of the United States. FAM also requires employees to bring any violations of the FAM or any other applicable regulations to attention to the appropriate official. Although OGE's authority to investigate and recommend solutions to most employees for conflicts of interest issues is well established, Congress did not extend this authority to the president and vice president in OGE's establishment statute. This does not mean there is an absence of any authority to hold the president and vice president accountable for conflict of interest issues. Rather, it demonstrates that the responsibility for holding the president and vice president responsible for conduct and implicates further conflicts of interest lies elsewhere, namely with Congress and the American people. Trump first, Mazers. Okay, hold on. I gotta fix how I'm scrolling. Right. In certain instances, like self-dealing, the harm is plain. Dang it. The harm is plain. In others, the harm, a loss or apparent loss of impartiality, may be less concrete, but the effect is still the same. When the impartiality of decision makers is drawn into question, it creates a chilling effect on the credibility of their decision making, processing, and the ultimate decision. That in turn could undermine the effectiveness of U.S. policy. Although these consequences may sometimes be difficult to measure or quantify, they certainly have an effect, or else there would be little reason to regulate them in the first instance. In the context of foreign affairs, because these subtleties matter, the FAM provides the chief of mission with the discretion to make these assessments. Elijah Cummings. Okay, so let's go down. Come on. The Vice President's office and State Department officials were aware but ignored concerns relating to Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board. Introduction. In early 2015, senior State Department official George Kent raised concern to staff in the office of the Vice President about Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board. Kent testified that he never heard anything back from the Vice President's office, and although Kent advised that Hunter Biden should step down from Burisma's board to avoid the perception of a potential conflict of interest, his recommendation was not followed. Oops. Dang it. There we go. His recommendation was not followed. Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board continued to be an issue State Department officials had to manage when executing... Where is it? Sorry, I lost it. Executing U.S.-Ukraine policy. More than a year after Kent reported his concerns to the Vice President's staff, he wrote to his superiors that Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board was very awkward. To those in front of the line, on the front lines, pushing anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine on a daily basis, Kent testified that he felt the need to prepare everybody for whataboutism, because we're pushing what's right, and we have to be prepared for people who are critics and opponents to say, well, what about Hunter Biden? Indeed, Kent testified further, and he would have advised any American not to get on the board of Zlochevsky's company. The committees were also aware of at least one other senior State Department official, Amos Hochstein, who raised concerns directly to Vice President Biden about potential conflicts of interest relating to Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board. Although Hochstein declined to testify about the substance of his conversation with Vice President Biden, the New Yorker reported that Hochstein did not go so far as to recommend Hunter leave the board. The committees found that neither the office of the Vice President nor the State Department ever took any action following these complaints. Sip of coffee. All right. In February 2015, Kent raised concerns about the perception of a conflict of interest regarding Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board. According to Kent, in early 2015, when he was still acting deputy chief of mission at U.S. Embassy in Kiev, he learned that Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. Kent stated soon after that, in a briefing call with the National Security Staff and the Office of Vice President on other matters, in February 2015, I raised my concern that Hunter Biden's status as a board member could create the perception of conflicts of interest. Kent continued. These are transcripts from testimonies. All right. I said that I had learned that Hunter Biden had been appointed to a board of this company, that I had just raised U.S. concerns about the owner of the company who were believed had been engaged in money laundering. The bottom line was, I said I believe that this creates the perception of a potential conflict of interest given Vice President Biden's role and his very strong advocacy for anti-corruption action, and that I thought that someone needed to talk to Hunter Biden, and he should step down for the board of Burisma. When the committees asked Kent, who he spoke to in Vice President Biden's office, he stated, I can't remember, to be perfectly honest. I don't remember. Where did I read that? Okay, so I remember who I spoke to. Okay. association continued to be awkward conflict of interest, and officials had to manage. Hunter Biden's association with Burisma appeared in numerous State Department records, particularly when state officials discussed the company, its owner, anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine. According to, according to records reviewed by committees in 2016, Kent mentioned Hunter Biden when discussing Burisma with his colleagues. Kent told the committees, "For me, it's preparing everybody for whataboutisms, because we're pushing what's right and we do what's right, and we have to be prepared for people who are critics, our opponents, to say, well, what about Hunter Biden?" So there was no time, as I've testified, that the U.S. government, the U.S. Embassy, ever made a decision about Zlochevsky or Burisma where we took the presence of a private citizen on the board into account. We made the decision on the merits, but others might think otherwise, and so everyone needed to be aware of what we were dealing with as we made the right decisions. The extent to which Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board affected U.S. policy toward Ukraine is not clear. But what is clear from the records, however, is that State Department officials, particularly Kent himself, regularly considered how Hunter Biden's connection to Burisma might affect the execution of U.S. policy. Moreover, as described previously, this included having to respond to Russian actors attempting to exploit Hunter Biden's position on Burisma's board to drive a wedge between Ukrainian and the U.S. in an effort to undermine U.S. policy towards Ukraine. For example, Kent raised Hunter Biden's connection to Burisma during multiple discussions over emails involving the Municipal Energy Reform Program, MERP. In those emails, Kent asked his colleagues, how have we traditionally treated engaged Burisma, given the Zlochevsky connection, but also perhaps U.S. involvement beyond Hunter Biden? In another email chain, Kent also pointed out that Zlochevsky put Hunter Biden on the board of Burisma Energy Company. When inquiring about the extent to which State Department officials researched Burisma's past in order to determine whether to associate with the company, Kent asked his colleagues whether any Know Your Partner due diligence was done before the partnership between MERP and Burisma was established. Kent then described old news stories involving the company Zlochevsky was a corrupt actor was a 2014 story, and his control of Burisma at the very sticky wicket of the Hunter Biden connection on Burisma's board. Let's see, was circulating in 2015. Why is my mouse not working? There we go. As part of the same email chain, Kent was asked his colleagues, if the U.S. government continues its association with Burisma, would we want an article on the front page of the Washington Post, and in this case Kiev Post, and on the FBI pages of Sergei Lysenko and Mustafa Nayem, commenting about this public-private partnership with the Burisma link to Hunter Biden and the link to Zlochevsky, who almost certainly paid off the PGO in December 2014. I had the then first deputy PG, Danilenko, tell me that the bribe was $7 million to have the case against him closed, as his $23 million in assets frozen in the UK unfrozen. Kent told the committee that he mentioned Hunter Biden's name in this context because he believed that all U.S. government officials needed to be aware of the factors involved in an issue. George Kent testimony at 113. When asked why Kent did not raise the names of other individuals on Burisma's board, he said, "The one American that I was aware of that was on the board in 2016 was Hunter Biden." Kent said in testimony at 114, "The MERP was a program funded by the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. According to State Department documents, MERPs and Burisma entered into a memorandum of understanding on October 13th, 2014. Email redacted to George Kent. Kent testified that in 2015, he beset awards given by the program implementator to be funded by Burisma. They were planning on another set of awards. Mid-September, we pulled the plug. There was no second. George Kent. So even though the total amount of time State Department officials spent accounting for Hunter Biden's association with Burisma is unclear, the records show that this was an issue that had to be adjusted repeatedly. More than 1 year after Kent reported his concerns about Hunter Biden to the vice president's office, he once again raised the concern, this time to his superiors at the State Department. On September 6, 2016, Kent wrote an email to senior State Department officials, including Deputy Assistant Secretary Bridget Brink and U.S. Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, and offered his contemporaneous view of Hunter Biden's association with Burisma. Kent wrote, the presence of Hunter Biden on the Burisma board was very awkward for all U.S. officials pushing an anti-corruption agenda in Ukraine. The testimony Kent expanded on this comment. I meant that people who talk the talk need to walk the walk, and for the U.S. government collectively, when we talk about the need to have high standards of integrity again, as I've said, the presence of Hunter Biden on the board created the perception of a potential conflict of interest. The committees learned through document requests that Victoria Nuland, then Assistant Secretary for European and Eurasian Affairs, also received a forwarded copy of Kent's September 2016 email outlining his concerns about Hunter Biden. She received the copy of it, okay? About Hunter Biden being on Burisma's board. Nuland testified that she was always open to hearing the concerns of subordinates and trying to address them in an open and transparent manner. Yet, when the committee asked Nuland to explain what actions she took when she received Kent's email, she said that Kent's concerns about Hunter Biden were clearly way deep down in an email late 2016. They were not brought to my specific attention, but George Kent was an old friend and had plenty of opportunity to do so, had he so wanted. Despite senior State Department officials clearly being made aware of the situation, Kent's concerns remained unaddressed. Hochstein spoke to Vice President Biden about concerns relating to Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board because, according to Hochstein, Russians were using it to advance disinformation. According to testimony and public reports, Hochstein, then U.S. Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs, raised concerns about Hunter Biden's role in Burisma's board directly to Vice President Biden. Nuland told the committees. Amos Hochstein had a conversation with the vice president and his staff about this, and he also had another conversation on the plane ride to Ukraine for that December 2015 trip. Public reporting also confirms Hochstein's discussion with Vice President Biden, according to one report. Amos Hochstein, the Biden administration's special envoy for energy policy, raised the matter with Biden, but did not go so far as to recommend that Hunter leave the board. When Hochstein testified before the committees, he declined, on advice of counsel, to testify about the substance of his conversation with Vice President Biden. The New Yorker, however, reported that Hochstein did not go as far to recommend that Hunter leave the board. It is unclear how Vice President Biden responded to this conversation. According to Hochstein, he raised the issue with the Vice President Biden because he was concerned with the Russians were using Hunter Biden's role with Burisma to sow disinformation. Hochstein recounted that he spoke with Vice President Biden in the West Wing of the White House in October 2015. When asked why he decided to raise an issue of Hunter Biden's position on Burisma's board with Vice President Biden, Hochstein testified, "We were starting to think about a trip to Ukraine, and I wanted to make sure that he, Vice President Biden, was aware that there was an increase in chatter on media outlets close to Russians and corrupt oligarchs-owned media outlets about undermining his message to try to undermine his vice Vice President Biden's message and including Hunter Biden being part of the board of Burisma. Hochstein also raised concerns about Russian disinformation with Hunter Biden. Shortly after his conversation with Vice President Biden, Hunter Biden contacted Hochstein and asked to meet. According to Hochstein, Hunter became aware of Hochstein's West Wing conversation with the vice president, who had mentioned it to Hunter. Hochstein described what he had discussed in his November 26, 2015 meeting with at a coffee shop in Georgetown. Question, and could you expand on that? Why did you discuss Burisma with him, Hunter Biden? Hochstein, well, Hunter Biden, asked me for a meeting. I think he wanted to show my views on Burisma and Zlochevsky, and so I shared with him that the Russians were using his name in order to sow attempt to sow disinformation among Ukrainians. During the November 2015 conversation with Hunter Biden, Hochstein did not recommend that Hunter leave Burisma's board because he did not believe that was my place to have that discussion one way or the other. Conclusion, Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board hindered the efforts of dedicated career service individuals who were fighting for anti-corruption measures in Ukraine. Because the vice president's son had a direct link to corrupt companies and its owner, State Department officials were required to maintain situational awareness of Hunter Biden's association with Burisma. Unfortunately, U.S. officials have no other choice but to endure the awkwardness of continuing to push an anti-corruption agenda in Ukraine. While the vice president's son sat on the board of a Ukrainian company with the corrupt owner, earning tens of thousands of dollars a month, as Kent testified, he would have advised any American not to get on the board of Zlochevsky's company. Yet, even though Hunter Biden's position on Burisma's board cast a shadow over the work of those advancing anti-corruption reforms in Ukraine, the committees are also aware of two individuals who raised concern to their superiors. Despite the efforts of these individuals, their concerns appear to have fallen on deaf ears. Gonna end there, and yeah.